there's a distinction that could be made that we quote unquote do have multiple personalities, end quote, and we don't. We're adjusting to other people's vibes, but we're still ourselves. So that's where we don't have multiple personality disorder. But how we relate to confusion and other conformities casually, and how we lose ourselves, and we're taking on someone else's influence without us knowing it, and then we're kind of participating with their conditioning with our conditioning, then that's the standard multiple personality disorder. So seeing how we could have multiple personality disorder, but we don't necessarily do that if we're just true to ourselves, you know, and how we could see how other people are them, letting other people do their thing, and we receive their influence. So we don't have quote unquote multiple personality disorder, and we do have multiple personality disorder, quote unquote, end quote, but it's not necessarily like the traditional clinical type of definitions for how they're diagnosing a person, you know, because how they're diagnosing a person, simultaneously they're using this pharmaceutical industry that's not conducive for the human, duh. And, you know, seeing where we could have extreme acceptance, and then where we don't have to accept what we, you know, what's not for us. But at the same time, like the macro collective that has more free will on its own accord than any individual. So like there's this practice where we could go to have some type of extreme acceptance, you know, and we're not necessarily practicing that, but if we do practice that, that's just where I'm like seeing things, you know, we could have that, you know. So like we could like kind of like, I guess, because the acceptance kind of evens the energies out more or less. But like what we endure is our karma. So what we endure is our karma. And obviously like there's a wavelength within, like, you know, uncertainty, unawareness, like obviously like within our own quote unquote like mini Saturns, end quote, we all have to like our relationship to Saturn, we have to take things one thing at a time, and the collective has to take things one at a time, and the human doesn't understand the waiting games, because everyone has to like adjust to a whole different system. So we're working on like the whole like the machine, you know, the quote unquote machine, and the machine is changing. The machine, the quote unquote machine agency industry, quote slash Saturn, end quote, is changing. And we're all like fixing that. We're all with that. So it's even like we have different relationships with Saturn. We have the relationship with the matrix to Saturn, and then we have relationship to the genetics of Saturn. Those are two different relationships with Saturn. And you have the everyone has their own matrix mechanics, each of the 16 godheads, and then they also simultaneously have their own genetics. So there's a casual double fold relationship with them, like a standard one though, like a initial one kind of. And within that, we're caught up. The 3D is caught up within the Saturn. The whole law system is like, you know, the Saturn fighting, like, you know, quarreling over the physical objects, and then Mercury, all the mental quote unquote magic, end quote, and then, you know, Venus and Lilith is there, you know. So those four, that's like the whole low-key standard like law industry too, because the law has to deal with, like, you know, the mental codes and the mental, like, you know, the mental codes and the mental scrolls, and like the whole like whatever has to do with thinking and literacies. Mercury, Saturn being the physical objects to all of that stuff, Venus being like the actual incidents and circumstances, the actual, you know, stipulation to, like, you know, the specimens of the beings of love and quote unquote hate, metaphysically, esoterically, whatever. And then, you know, and this whole like quote unquote casual shadow element, Lilith. So I just simplify the whole law system in an esoteric perspective casually. Could we have extreme acceptance to those forces that they're doing their thing within their own matrix mechanics, within their own genetics, and we're just micro specimens catching up to their stuff, understanding how that shit works. So I just simplified the whole law system. You have the best life ever.